Hello. All right, so I think we're gonna get started. So I think most of you know me, probably, but if you don't, I'm Virginia Offerman. I'm the program coordinator here for the Art Museum, so I'm filling in for Heather today, who would usually give our intro. She's sick, as things are going around, God knows. So today our Lunchtime Looks speaker is Dr. Katie Jones. Katie is an associate professor and the program coordinator for the Fashion Design and Merchandising program here at WVU. Her research focuses on the intersections of fashion and media, and also how things like gender and sustainability sort of play into those concepts. Her research specializes in mass media's impact on how we view fashion, how we participate in fashion as both a cultural practice that's sort of inescapable, we're all participating in it, and as a consumer product that we're purchasing and sort of buying and trading. So today Katie's going to talk about sort of how objects are transformed in a museum, how fashion functions in a museum space, which is sort of out of the ordinary for how we usually interact with fashion in a very sort of personal, tangible way. So she'll talk a little bit about that, and then she's going to ask all of you some questions about, sort of open-ended questions about how these objects have been transformed now that they are here in a gallery instead of being worn on our bodies or slept in beds or blankets. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and she's going to tell us all more about that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So excited that you joined us here today in this excellent exhibition and get to talk through some of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to fashion, really thinking about it as a cultural product. Before I dive into some contextual information that I think will help inform our conversation today, I do want to clarify some of the terms you might hear me use. I'm going to use fashion as a shorthand for a lot of things. It's a big word that contains multitudes, thinking about the practice, the product, the industry, and certainly has all sorts of connotations of elitism and gender, exclusionary, inclusionary, all of those things that happen when we talk about fashion. I may also use the term dress, which is the more anthropological term of all of the things that we do to our body from head to toe. Fashion is always dress. Dress is not always considered fashion. And of course, when we're thinking about the space that we're in today, fashion is doing a lot of work to include things that were never necessarily intended to be on the body, though the body may be implied. So for me, fashion is always, even if we're talking about the cultural industry around fashion, fashion is inherently about the body at its essence, that it is a bodily connection, an embodiment of our cultural values and our identities and the ways in which we communicate with each other. So again, I'm going to give us some context for museums as spaces that house fashion often now, but what that means for this product. Just so you know, we are less than a month away from the first Monday in May. Does that mean anything to anyone in this room? It's May Day, but in this conversation, I know there's at least one person. Go for it. It is the Met Gala, the first Monday in May. So for those who don't know, the Met Gala is the annual fundraising event put on by the Costume Institute. It's a curatorial department housed within the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The spectacle of the gala is cultivated through the museum's long-running collaboration with Vogue magazine, Anna Wintour in particular, promoting it as the fashion party of the year. The glitz and glam of the event, promotions and the celebrities who attend, it often obscures the event's purpose. The gala must go well. The funds raised by those pricey tickets, and just for some context, it's $350,000 for a table of 10, $75,000 for an individual ticket, and that is invitation only. So we could all pool together and still probably never get on that list, just so you know. But those pricey tickets, they must cover the Costume Institute's operating budget for the year. And note that it is the only department at the Metropolitan Museum that must fundraise its own budget. So just keep that in mind. So the Costume Institute was first established as an independent entity called the Museum of Costume Art in 1937 by Irene Lewison. In 1946, the fashion industry provided financial backing to help the collection merge with the Metropolitan Museum, officially becoming a curatorial department in 1959. It is a vital resource for the Met as well. Its exhibitions regularly draw crowds willing to wait several hours in line to get a chance to see some of the 30,000 plus objects held by this department. In fact, 4 of the top 10 of the Met's exhibitions based on attendance are fashion exhibitions. The 2018 Costume Institute exhibition, Heavenly Bodies, is the top spot. It drew almost 1.7 million visitors during its run. That was 300,000 more than the 1977-78 installation of The Treasures of King Tutankhamun. So one question we can ponder today is fashion art. It's a big one. It's a question that I often pose to students in our fashion culture course. Their answer often is yes, but. And it's that hesitation that I'm most interested in exploring with you today from your own lived experience, from the context of this space as well. So the success of the Costume Institute's exhibits under the roof of one of the United States' premier fine art institutions settles this question for a lot of folks, that it's in the space, it must be, that the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So there are still many, though, who would argue it is not. In a piece titled Museums as Fashion Media, published in 2000, Fiona Anderson stated, quote, "Prejudice, fear, and suspicion still surround the status of fashion within many museums. This sometimes takes the form of fashion being tolerated as a form of entertainment, which will pull the crowds with no acknowledgement of the serious contribution it also makes to the educational role of the museum. Regardless, fashion and dress objects have been collected and exhibited by curators in a variety of institutions, including fine art, decorative art, and ethnographic museums, since at least the mid-19th century. Notable fashion historian and director of the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, Valerie Steele, documented the rise of and resistance to the fashion exhibition in museum spaces. In one article, she noted that some museum staff have viewed fashion and historic dress as, quote, a sort of unholy byproduct of the textile industry, end quote. One cannot really talk about this resistance without taking gender and class into consideration. Lou Taylor, another noted scholar on fashion in museum spaces, observed that male leadership in museums and curators viewed fashion's commerciality and associations with the feminine as disqualifying qualities, barring the subject from their hallowed halls. Thus, many of the finest fashion specimens that museums now hold were first collected and managed as private collections by society women, that is, wealthy, white, urban women, and often ardent participants in contemporary fashion. So, who, of course, these women brought their own biases and values to the collection and documentation process. And just as a fun little aside, it was not uncommon for these collections, even in museum spaces, to be paraded out once a year, put on to living models, which of course you would never think of doing with any other type of art object. So the question, is fashion art, is perennial. It's debated in fashion studies and curatorial circles with some regularity. In fact, it seems to be at the front of fashion curators' minds once again. The museum at the Fashion Institute of New York's current exhibition, curated by the brilliant Elizabeth Way, is titled Art X Fashion and, quote, aims to challenge the traditional hierarchies of visual culture by presenting fashion as a parallel and often intersecting expression of social, intellectual, and creative forces, end quote. The Costume Institute's spring exhibition, curated by Andrew Bolton, that will be opened by the Met Gala in a couple of weeks, will be titled Costume Art, and it will explore the connection between fashion and the body through both fashion objects and representations of the body found throughout the museum's other curatorial departments. So once again, with the goal to show the ways in which fashion and art intersect, specifically through representations of the body. Whatever unsettled aspects of its classification remain, fashion is undoubtedly in art museums, and museum visitors clearly delight in engaging with this particular human form of expression in those spaces. So from here, I'd like to chat through what happens when fashion moves into these museum spaces. And I'd like us to think about how these four walls, or increasingly digital spaces that identify as museums, and all the concomitant discourses that word conjures, how that co-constitutes and reshapes our relationship to the objects and practices displayed therein. Specifically, these fashion objects, objects that we immediately identify as fashion. So I think first opening it up, and thinking about this idea of museums, do we think fashion is different than other objects that we encounter in museums? And if so, how? And if you have a thought to share, we have a mic to help our digital friends also enjoy the conversation.
Well, I guess is this on? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just we're going to the recording, yeah.
Okay, all right, great. I see fashion in the same way as I see any design object, more, and then you get into the discussion of what is design, what is art.
Yeah.
Which we do in landscape architecture, but also industrial design. And so I've been to a lot of the exhibits of industrial designers as objects and things that are useful in the home. And, to me, I think the discussion is really the distinction between art and design, and where does that fall?
Certainly, that they are designed objects. We know there's purpose
Right.
and there's utility,
Right.
which may be then that boundary.
Which informs the discussion of the design process. You have a client, you have functional requirements. So
Yeah, there's more than, and not to put down art in any way, but mere expression that's not the only thing that must be accomplished through the
Right.
design process. That there are often other factors that must be taken into consideration. Certainly.
And I guess why make the distinction?
Yeah. Why ask the question at all? Certainly is a valid response. So I want to throw out a couple of things to think about. Coming back to the body, I think that is critical in the debate about is fashion art, the presence of the body or the ghost of the body, as happens when they move into these spaces. And we stopped that terrible practice of live models putting on these precious historic items. So fashion's intimacy with the body, it bridges a lot of the divides between the sacred and the profane, the mind and the material, the ephemeral and the more solid, the texture of it. For me, it's materiality and the connection to the body is the thing that makes fashion most compelling. There is an immediate empathy and connection to an object. I can't really talk about fashion, especially in museum spaces, without doing this. The engagement with the body is the point. I can't walk really through any space that has textiles in it and not want to grab. And I know as stewards of these objects, you've experienced that intimately with this particular exhibition in this space. That when there are paintings on the wall, we might want to get close to see the brushstrokes and to see the construction of the image. But there is something extra compelling and almost we feel almost a right to engage with the product, to put our body in conversation with these objects, because that is what it is for. It is for the connection to the body, and the body was in mind when it was made. So there's the body. There's also, in the West, especially since the Enlightenment, fashion has largely been framed as a feminine pursuit, or perhaps one of our weaknesses as the feminine sex. So anyone who studies art knows the challenges women artists have long faced in the art world and in museum and collection curatorial practice. So when we're thinking about the very fact that the question is asked, we can also think about, well, who makes the art? How might that be informing the ways in which we engage with it here? That just even the idea of, is it collected? Is it valued? Is it seen as worthy of inclusion? It's going to perhaps be more than just the piece itself, that the maker, its long history of connection to the feminine sphere across cultures, but particularly in the Western cultures, this divide, the gender divide that still informs us. So fashion's commerciality, I think, is something that often comes up, and especially with those blockbuster exhibitions that feature major luxury labels and their long history of putting out beautiful, even if they're one-off objects that perhaps have never been worn, but their celebration of their practice. However, I can also perhaps leave the Metropolitan after seeing a blockbuster Alexander McQueen exhibit and pop down to the store a couple of blocks away and purchase a piece of that thing, which, we could debate gift shops and museums as well as kind of similarly commercializing art spaces, but there is a distinction there. The immediacy that I can participate perhaps more as a consumer in the fashion art dynamic, more so than I am likely to be able to buy one of the paintings off the wall of the Met. So those commerciality aspects. So fashion is material culture, but it's also an amalgamation of human stories, and that's, again, really where it holds fascination for me. Who made it, who sold it, who wore it, and which stories should be prioritized by the museum. Those stories, they're embedded in the cloth. They're sometimes lost to time. There's the thing that happens when objects move into these spaces and they suddenly have to become representative of many people's experiences, but they are also intimately tied often to specific experiences, the specific legacy or the biography of the object, of who wore it, who sold it, who made it, all of those narratives wrapped up in this textile. So should the object even be preserved in its used state? Should it be cleaned? Should it be altered? Should it be unaltered? As so many historic objects, that question arises. So there's complications to these objects that have had entire lives before they ever moved into this space. So to come back to this space, I want us to look at these two objects here, both by the artist Jenny Walton. First, we have a small Bergdorf Goodman shopping bag that the luxury New York department store commissioned Walton to paint in 2023. Walton has taken the standard bag Bergdorf sends their customers' purchases home in and has painted the illusion of a lacy blue bra spilling out of the top. On the reverse, she hand-painted the phrase, "She bought something sexy and she doesn't care if you like it." The collection of hand-painted bags were on display and, crucially, for sale in a gallery space in Bergdorf's. The store partnered with the online art and vintage decorative objects retailer Cherish to bring 300 original works of art by 30 different artists into the store. Women's Wear Daily reported at the time that similar works and prints exhibited in this space were simultaneously available for sale on Cherish's website. So again, that commerciality can be taken very, very literally here. And the other object is a late 1950s, early 1960s dress. In an interview Walton gave to the Philadelphia Inquirer when this exhibit toured in Philly, she stated that she found the dress in a wardrobe left behind in a French village purchased by her friend. She hand-painted the phrase, "I can't believe I forgot to have children," with children strategically arranged on the dress to appear as though the letters are, quote, "falling out of the uterus," end quote. Walton shared that she took that quote from a vintage t-shirt that she owns. She also shared that she did wear this customized dress out in New York. So Walton, just for a little more context, Jenny Walton bills herself as an artist, but also as a vintage fashion influencer with several 100,000 followers on Instagram. Hard to know why people join a community, but a lot of her content is about living an aesthetic life, currently in Milan, soon to be elsewhere. And she also has a book coming out this month published by Phaidon titled Je ne sais quoi, Adventures in Vintage and Personal Style. Extra points for the pun in the title from me, for sure. So thus, in Walton's pieces and her career, we can see the ways in which commerce and art, the artist's statement and the artist's embodied experience, the material and the ephemeral, they mesh, they merge, they collide, and they dissolve. So coming back to our questions in this space, so what happens to an object? The objects as they had lives outside of this space, or thinking about objects that you've encountered in museums before, when they move into the stewardship of a museum, what is that process for a fashion object? For those who are in curatorial practice, should the object be treated in any different way? Are there particular considerations that come with these fashion objects? So what are those unique affordances and possible liabilities of fashion moving into a museum space? thoughts? Please.
So I would be the person putting it in storage. So my first thought is UV exposure. You want to protect it from that. And typically you'd want to pad it out even if it's in a box.
Yeah.
So your folds aren't sharp and crisp. And if it's something like silk, it's going to deteriorate over time.
Yes.
Naturally. So, and IPM, you have to worry about pests in your collection. So textiles are just so fragile compared to wood objects and metal and other things that you have that you can just put on a shelf and add a label. So a lot of care goes into these garments.
Yeah, well, and especially thinking that, especially when we're talking about fashion, it was never intended to last. Its limited time is the point. And the presumption that at some point it will be discarded, whether because we wear it into the ground and the interaction with the body just makes it impossible for it to carry on, or it loses its ephemeral quality that we love about it, and so it's discarded in some other way. So it was never intended to last. So to move it into a museum space is to actually contradict, when we're talking about fashion, to contradict its very essence, which is change and discard as the cycles go, for sure. Other considerations that we think of when we think about fashion coming into museum spaces.
When it comes into the museum, it loses its human body.
Absolutely. And that has long been a problem. A problem is perhaps the wrong word, but that, yeah, there's vitality to clothing when it's on our bodies. We think about how we move in it and how it interacts with our form, and then to see it static really changes its character. I mean, we have it on a hanger here, which at least it implies that idea of being in a closet, to being ready to don, ready to put on the body. But then we have other objects that are on headless forms, and the ways in which that headlessness it fills out the object, but it also robs it of any distinct character, that we are meant to focus merely on the object itself and not think about the embodiment and how fashion is, again, both an object and also the performance of the object out in the world, and how we use them in our performance of self. You know, I can think about how much thought I put into these objects I have on my body today, because there was, some idea of what these objects needed to tell. And once they go into a museum storage space, that character of performance and identity construction, the specificity of being on a particular body, is necessarily put aside, because now it must serve a different purpose than that intimate and individualistic purpose that perhaps it was first acquired for or even made for. So my kind of last thinking exercise here is, what stories do we expect to encounter when we enter a museum, and do we think fashion can deliver those narratives? And particularly, I'm curious if you think there are any narratives that only fashion can deliver, and the kind of the special role and the special affordances that objects like these allow in spaces, that if these were not permitted, what would we be missing out on? Yeah, of course. That are fashion objects able to tell distinct and unique stories in museum spaces that other forms of art and expression can't tell? And so if we suddenly said no more fashion in museums, we would lose that something that fashion can do.
So I think that it's just fashion is so uniquely personal, and especially within historical context.
Absolutely.
And I feel like if we lose that, we lose the day-to-day function. I think about the difference between dresses and for women and different levels of wealth. I forget the word for it, but that's what I think of, and oh, this is what they wore when they worked, and this is how it was functional and useful, but also still beautiful for them. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. And I would say that's probably in the evolution of fashion in the museum, those have been the least controversial exhibitions, those that show fashion as a particular mark of history, that come to an exhibition about dresses from the Civil War, and we can understand what the construction of gender was at that time. We can understand the technology of the time, and we can even empathetically imagine perhaps a little bit of being in the time, because we intimately understand what that cloth might have felt like on our own bodies. So that passage of time between us and the object, we imagine more of ourselves interacting with it. So yeah, that historical quality and the connection to the past while this object is very much in the present there's a little bit of magic there that happens as a time traveling object. Anything else? Any other stories that occur to you?
I was going to say, I think fashion is much more relatable to everyone. Again, we're all interacting with fashion and clothing in some way, shape, or form. And our job as museum educators, like when we do tours, it's a lot harder to make a group of 5-year-old children or a group of older people, or to sort of make everyone understand the importance and the significance and the meaning of a painting or a ceramic, or especially when we have a lot of abstract artworks. There's a bigger gap to bridge between where people are and what they understand in their own lives and understanding this artist and why they made the choices they did. I think no matter who I bring into this exhibition, they at least understand something. There's an immediate connection because fashion is so personal to us. And it's kind of a great equalizer. Not everybody understands paintings, not everyone has access to those sorts of things. We all have access to some sort of clothing. It's just sort of part of being a person. It might not be nice clothing or designer, clothing at the Met, but we all interact with it at some way, so it's base level much more relatable and easier to make that connection to fashion objects.
For sure. One of the critiques or the ways that fashion exhibitions are framed is that for those who don't see its value in the space will often deride it as, well, it just looks like a boutique that, it's like you're shopping through. I'm like, well, shopping is a way to engage. It's a pastime, particularly in this country. So if it serves to bring in more people to the space, then that familiarity might be the ticket to having museums not feel so exclusionary. That we all dress. It's the thing I tell anyone I encounter. It is the thing that we are always doing together. We all eat. We all dress, but dress is the thing that we are constantly always doing. So there is that shared human experience element to it that, again, it makes it fascinating and rich and engaging for so many different people. And I am so happy that you all joined me in thinking through how moving into this space challenges us in some ways. It challenges our definitions of what art is. It challenges our understanding of commerciality and lived experience, the ephemeral nature of fashion, how it becomes more solid, perhaps, in museum spaces as well, and also those unique joys of discovering different types of objects in museum spaces. So thank you so much for joining in and for being willing participants.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was amazing. That was a really interesting talk. And I know that Katie asked you all, the audience, a lot more questions than you might be used to getting as audience members at a Lunchtime Looks. But now I want to ask if any of you have questions for Katie or additional thoughts on any of the questions that she asked.
So I was going to ask, like, you talked specifically about these two pieces here, but think about other pieces in this exhibit or even like downstairs in the Material Matters. Is there any piece that like stands out to you as particularly like having an interesting context that has changed by being put into a museum?
Yeah, interesting question. Let me think for a moment. I think when we have objects that are the most mundane. Like here we have the opportunity to kind of see how the object has been transformed by being turned in almost art to wear. And we perhaps give more permissiveness to an art to wear. But the shirts that are hanging on the hangers in various spaces, ones that truly we might see in perhaps a more art-focused consumer base, but a boutique. We could run into some of these objects out in the world today if we were in the right commercial space. I think the more mundane an object is, the more fascinating transition that happens when it comes into a museum space, because there is something about these walls that it changes it. It foundationally changes it. And I think there are so many artists throughout the 20th century who understood that critical point, that you take something mundane, you move it into this space, voila, it is something different. So I think for fashion, yes, I tend to look for the more mundane thing. I am always blown away by the spectacular, but understanding how, an interesting textile turned into a basic button-down shirt, how that interplay of textile surface design, but simple, rather basic form that it takes, it challenges us in a way. We had students do a close-looking exercise in the space yesterday, and I had a student who chose the, and perhaps you can help me with the artist, the white shirt with the A on it. We'll figure that out. But I was surprised he was drawn to it, because it is relatively basic. It was a white shirt, has a red letter A, and then when I spoke to him and asked him, he had to look at it for a solid 5 minutes, nothing else, and to just gaze upon it. And he said it was meditative to engage with this relatively simplistic product, and then think about this literal scarlet A on a man's shirt. What does that do? All of the associations that come up with that, recognizing the era in which it was produced, the late 80s, I believe, and thinking about the AIDS crisis. And so a man's body wearing a basic white shirt with a red letter A on it, that we might pass by that shirt quickly because it does look so mundane, but when he sat with it for so long, all of these associations that washed over him. So that particular type of object, I think, is really fascinating.
With fashion, as you started using that word, when I think of fashion, I think of what's out on the street, which is temporary.
Yep.
When an object moves into a museum, then is that intended to confer permanency for that object?
Yeah.
Does the museum then, yes.
Yeah, and it is, that is one of the first things, as Professor Schrock knows, that one of the first things that all fashion students learn is fashion means change. That is, its essence is change. The object may remain, but that quality is what shifts over time, and we can bestow it upon an object and we can take it away. So it is a bit of an oxymoron to say fashion in a museum, because we are putting it under a bell jar by bringing it into this space. But at the same time, we're putting it under a bell jar as a particular, in its era, we understand it was produced for a particular customer by a particular artist in this particular milieu, and it's representative perhaps of what people were interested in within this particular time. But then it can transcend time as well, because we know that, well, for example here, a 1960s dress that was brought into the 2020s and reconfigured and rethought of and put onto a modern body. So is it 1960s fashion? Is it 2020s fashion? That the body brings it across time. Curators will bring it across time to speak with other objects and the ways in which fashion can both mark a very specific moment, but also move between moments. So yes, the object kind of is probably locked in place once it moves into this space. But that the possibility of interpretation, I think, remains.
So kind of two things. What you talked about earlier with the idea that the body moves and these clothes are designed to be on a moving body. And I think that's interesting. That's really interesting. And I just would be interested in exhibitions that really highlighted that in various ways. I make sure video and film or other ways of moving. Because I'm looking at those pants behind you this whole time, and those were like, I can see hip hop dancers. It's like definitely they were like dancing things. And then also, when you get one of them, it's one size, and of course bodies come in all sizes, and so that's sort of interesting too. These are just thoughts I'm having, and I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to hear, in your experience, how museums or how exhibitions have dealt with those two items.
Yeah, so did anyone see sporting fashion at the Frick a couple of years ago? The Frick, if you are interested in fashion in museum spaces, about every other year now, they have a pretty major fashion exhibition come through, usually a traveling exhibition. They hosted sporting fashion a couple of years ago, and sport, the body must move in sport. So that was a big challenge for the original curators. Were at, I believe it was FIDM, the museum associated with the school out in LA, and that was one of their challenges. How do you show garments that in life had to move? And so they specially designed mannequins that were shown as if they were in motion. They had one that an ensemble worn while ice skating in the early 19th century looked as if the mannequin had just fallen. So show that, giving motion to stationary objects and thinking more like set designers of like how do you convey something that must be static? So motion in a static environment. So curators have started getting creative with that. I know there has been, like we have here, projection onto textile objects because they do work really well as canvas. So I know with a Jean-Paul Gaultier exhibition that's traveled a couple of times, projecting onto the mannequins moving faces so that you could imagine, particularly because Jean-Paul Gaultier plays with gender a lot. So the mannequins had blank white faces, and then different individuals' faces were projected onto those blank canvases so that you could imagine different bodies occupying those spaces. So it would be a feminine face, an agent or face. You had all sorts of identities occupying that space, which helped, I think, the viewer understand that, yes, this mannequin is unmarked by gender, but here we can play with that in different ways. And then the one-off aspect. Yes, size inclusivity is as much of a problem, if not more so, in museums as it is in everyday life. So that remains a challenge. However, if the museum has really thought about what it's collecting, there are historic mannequin manufacturers that allow for the padding out and the reconstruction of the body so it fits human forms. So for example, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London has many of Queen Victoria's late in life garments. She was a short woman and a round woman. So when they put those objects on display, the mannequin must reflect her size to look anywhere near appropriate. But we also have the reverse issue of dresses that were worn on corseted bodies. And the ability to just pop that onto any mannequin is near impossible. So the fleshy body that occupied that object versus the very static and hard body that they often appear on remains a challenge in curatorial spaces for sure. But there have been technological innovations to help.
Thank you, Katie. What a fascinating talk. I'm interested in returning to kind of your original question, getting us to think about the line or lack of it between fashion and art. And this show sort of particularly complicates that question, right? Because I think every artist in the show self-identifies as an artist, not a designer. And so they were brought into work with the fashion workshop in Philadelphia to essentially create a art project that engages with fashion, but probably was never intended in any way to be worn, right? So their understanding from the start was that they were making an art project. I'm looking, for example, at Chris Burden's LAPD oversized uniforms. He didn't anticipate that police officers were going to wear those, and they wouldn't function that way anyhow. So it's a conceptual project for him. So thinking about that in relation to your question of that distinction.
Intention certainly complicates it. And I would I would also kind of point out that with the police uniforms, the body is still really central to the impact of that work, because we understand what a standard body is, and then thinking about, well, what type of body would have to occupy that much space, and how that becomes even more menacing than the uniform itself is menacing. But to fill that uniform out with a human form, with the very clearly at the scale that the artist is intending, that is the essence of the impact. So even if it's not intended to be worn, the body is present. Even in its absence, it is present. So yes, that's particularly why I chose these objects to focus on, the fact that they are both commercial, having been worn. The mark of the body is on the pink dress and is part of its narrative. But certainly there are many objects in this space where the concept is the point rather than the interaction with the body. But even just the fact of its tactility, I think that our bodies want to interact with them, still relies on that intimate connection to the body. So yeah, I think that often is the crux of how does the individual who made the thing, how do they identify their work, still remains central to a lot of these questions that we perhaps are. And I think museum spaces are perhaps more open to the idea of a full exhibition of textile work in its 2D form. It resembles the type of art we expect to encounter. And of course, many paintings are on textiles, so there's already that legacy. A lot of the overlap between the pigments that are used in art appear in fashion as well. My colleague Beth Sherrock knows that much better than I do. So yeah, those crossover points, I think they've been artificially cleaved apart, but there is so much intersection, and the intersections I think are where opportunities for collaboration really form. And again, Beth has done some amazing work on campus to bring those worlds together. That she occupies the commercial space of our fashion program, and working with more artist-minded folks in the School of Art and Design, and finding those intersections.
All right. I'm so glad that everyone had so many questions and very thoughtful questions. This has been amazing. Thank you again to Katie. Before I let you all go, I just want to give you some updates on the rest of our programming for the rest of April. So these exhibitions, this one and downstairs Material Matters, will be open until May 10th, Sunday, May 10th. This weekend, we actually have 2 public programs going on. So there's a story hour here. It will actually be in this gallery, probably over in that back corner. From 1 to 2 p.m. We'll read a story and then do an art activity. And then directly after that program, the lovely Beth Sherrock will be hosting a screen print.
So many shout outs
Beth is getting
today.
many shout outs today. So Beth will be collaborating on a screen printing workshop for us. So that will be from 2 to 4 p.m. And we will be doing a collaborative screen printing tapestry, basically. And then Beth will take that tapestry and make it into several tote bags at the WVU Retail Lab. So that's a very exciting collaboration. Next weekend, next Saturday, April 18th, we will have a wire wrapping, handmade jewelry event. You can make pendants and rings or little animal figurines. That will be from 1 to 3 p.m. And then our last program of the semester will be Thursday, April 30th. We're very excited about this. It'll be our exhibition Last Looks, but also a talk and discussion with the co-curator of this softcover exhibition, DJ Hellerman, and also the artist Amy Coran, who made the MSS or Mama spacesuit in the front of our gallery. I would check that out. It's a really, really exciting opportunity. We don't have all of the details for that nailed down yet, but just keep an eye out on our website or our social media, and there will be more details to come, but that's April 30th to Thursday evening. So yes, one more round of applause for Katie. It's been such a great talk.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.